Welcome to the Cre8tive Podcast. Today we're diving into one of the most common conversations in manufacturing technology, PDM versus PLM, and what the difference really means for manufacturers trying to scale, improve collaboration, and manage product data more effectively. Today, joining us is Jacob West, Director of PLM at Cre8tive, and Steffen Kunnen, Head of Product at PRO.FILE. Together, they'll break down where PDM ends and where PLM begins, and why understanding the difference can have a major impact on your processes, integrations, and long-term strategy.
Right. Thank you,
Thanks,
Audrey.
Audrey.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about PDM versus PLM. And I think we should start with a very basic discussion and start with maybe definitions. PDM versus PLM. I mean, there is a big difference just based on the phase alone. I mean, Jacob, what is your impression? Where does PDM end and where does PLM start?
Sure. It's a great question. It's a common question, and I think different people might have different answers to this. But from my experience, PDM is basically the practice of storing data, as some sort of a vault mechanism. Sometimes they have revision control, sometimes they don't. It's really more about a place for you to store a certain type of data in a certain way, not necessarily the controls and the life cycle around how to control and change that data over time and how to have metrics and everything else around that data. So I think at a very high core level, that's the big differentiator. At least that's what I see here in the US market.
I would even bring it one step further because from my experience, it's also about the development phase. I mean, we all know the typical product life cycle from
Sure.
idea to requirement phase, development phase, production, maintenance, and ongoing. And I mean, PDM usually is located in one single phase, in the engineering phase. So development. And I think that's where the origin was and has always been. And it manages product data. And I think the PLM side is actually completely different because PLM should cover the whole life cycle phase.
Exactly.
And we're not only managing product data because we also manage different types of data. I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings out there because people always tend to talk about, hey, we have a PLM solution, but in reality, they only have a PDM solution.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it's a fair point. PDM again, storing the data in a place, and that being just the core functionality of that doesn't take into account the life cycle like you had mentioned. So there's not really different stages of that item or model. If you're talking about a model or a drawing, if you're talking about a drawing, there's different stages of that item's life cycle, and PDM really just focuses on storing it, not necessarily controlling what phase it's in its life.
Yeah, I mean, controlling is actually in the process, different methods, different IT tools, development phases, and so on. What I always try to remember when I talk about PDM with PLM is actually the fact you can do PDM in a single tool, but you cannot do PLM usually in a single tool because it requires multiple tools, and therefore it forms a PLM system, a system architecture, because you have to integrate different processes from different tools, different like users must be involved as well. Different departments are involved. So I think PLM is way, way, way more compared to PDMs. And that's, I think, one of the main differences. So single phase, one tool, multiple phases, and I think a very, very large tool range that you can actually integrate into PLM lifecycle. I would like to discuss one more point with you. Because what we see here in Germany, and especially in Germany and the EMEA market, is that PLM is always called a product category. I will buy a PLM system. But in reality, it's actually a management philosophy or a strategy, how we call it. What is your impression on this topic?
So I think that we see a lot of the same in North America. PLM is kind of a word that a lot of people are now starting to understand, or recognize, I should say. Maybe they don't understand fully what PLM is, but they recognize the term PLM, and they associate it with, again, going back to the previous conversation, a lot about what a PDM is, and not necessarily what we would view a full PLM as being. And I'm looking at your slide here, and I do resonate with a lot of vendors calling PDM PLM because that's the term that people know, and the functionality that's offered by a PLM typically is lacking in a lot of other solutions that are more of a PDM masking as a PLM.
Yeah.
But the management philosophy is a huge part of it. In a PDM, it's about data storage. In a PLM, you're really starting to get more integrated with other platforms. You're starting to get a lot more detailed about the processes around how your data gets changed. And there's a huge management philosophy behind that. So I see a lot of the same in North America, although it's probably slightly different than what you see in
It is
EMEA markets.
totally different. I mean, the Mora market and the EMEA market, from my perspective, is completely opposite. I mean, PLM North America, it's platform based, it's SaaS based. AI adoption is insanely high from my perspective, and that's the big difference to Germany or EMEA. I mean, for us, I mean, PLM for most of our customers, and especially in EMEA market, is more about CAD integrations and ERP integrations. And I think that's, to me, quite self-explaining, because it all started like this 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago, in the PDM journey. And I mean, 30 years ago, the first CAD systems evolved. People started working in 3D, so they went away from 2D drawings, which is also product data, by the way. And they started to manage all this data in one single system. And I think from my perspective, they still do it right now. I think 80 to 90% of their day exists in PDM, and only a small part of the environment or the customers actually working in the PLM system or in the PLM environment outside of engineering. To me, that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, PDM versus PLM, because customers ask for PLM and then come up with the requirement that they need an ERP integration and a CAD integration, which is actually PDM. But I mean, it doesn't sound that fancy, and PLM always sounds better for them. So that's what we see, especially in EMEA, that customers ask for PLM, but actually have PDM requirements. Do you have something similar in the States as well, in North America?
In North America, yes, we do have similar practices. And again, it's really conflation of the terms PDM and PLM at the core, right? I mean, these two terms, and they mean some similar things if taken a bit out of context. But unless you understand the full concept of what PLM is versus PDM, you may not know that you're calling it the wrong thing. I do agree with you that the integrations into ERP, the integrations into CAD, the document management, all of those are fundamental PDM functions. PLM is really about taking that a step further and controlling all of the processes and the life cycle around those products that you are using those tools that I just mentioned to create and manage. It's process around how the data is managed overall, how it's used, how it's changed, and all of those things that really bring PLM into the organization. And I think you are also correct in saying that, at least typically and traditionally speaking, PDM is an engineering focused tool. PLM is really more of an enterprise tool because it doesn't just involve the engineering data. We're not talking about just a part number and a drawing and a model. We're talking about a part number, a drawing, a model, specific procedures that you might have around that particular product, requirements, certificates, certifications, lab tests, all kinds of specifications, manuals, all kinds of different product documentation that might be from multiple different departments: a technical publishing department, a marketing department. Your sales teams might need to have access to PLM to see the drawings and renderings so that they can send them to customers.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is what overall encompasses PLM in my view.
Yeah, I think especially the last part is very important, like other departments, because PDM is engineering, and engineering will always work in PDM. But I mean, the life cycle starts with the idea, starts with requirements. So you have multiple people already involved there, which are maybe not in engineering. And then, of course, then the after sales phase, for example, production, maintenance phase, like end of life. It's all this stuff. I mean, based on the product, for example, if we go towards asset management, for example, bigger power plants and so on, they have a very short development phase compared to the maintenance phase. And most of the data is actually gathered and created during the maintenance phase. And that is completely left outside of the scope from PDM. That is all in PLM. And I think from our perspective, what most of our prospects and the customers underestimate is the effort that it needs to really implement a PLM strategy or philosophy. You have to change the whole organization. You need to change every process. You need to change every method. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we will face across the globe when it comes from the PDM to PLM transformation is user adoption, because no one actually likes to change the way that they worked for 20, 30, 40 years. And if you now make the transition from a historically very well known and a very good working PDM solution towards PLM, it requires a lot of changes, new methods, new ways of working, basically. And that's also comes together with not only one single tool. Depending on the complexity of your system architecture, we talk about 10, 15, maybe 20 different tools, and they all must connect to each other. I think that's one of the biggest pain points that PLM users will experience. And that's one of the main challenges for us to handle and explain them, hey, do you really need a PLM, or maybe a PDM solution is sufficient for your use cases? It all depends, from my perspective, on the use case at all.
Yeah, especially if you can have a PDM that can grow into a PLM. Eventually, that's a critical aspect of that, I think.
What is your number one requirement to transfer from PDM to PLM? What is necessary from a tool perspective and from a customer perspective?
Well, I think the number one requirement, I think, for a customer to need to move from a PDM to a PLM is, well, I guess there's probably several that are probably pretty key. I don't know if there's a number one, but really, it's almost, to me, it feels like if there's any of other departments that need to be involved, that's going to be something that scopes more into a PLM, because there's going to be a lot more other types of data that are in the system that will lead to, if you involve technical publications or sales, for example, and something changes, that needs to be updated. There needs to be processes around informing the people who are accessing that data what the latest revision is or what the latest version is and how to do that. All of that is process based, and I also think that if a customer is going to just need somewhere to store information from an engineering, or even sometimes from outside of engineering perspective, that could still be a PDM. But if they really want to manage the life cycle and understand the entire impact of a change to something in PLM, that's really something that you can't understand the full impact that something has unless you are treating that information like in a PLM system with other information that's relevant. If you store your product manuals in your technical publications department on a network share drive, but you have the product that manual is about stored in a PDM, and your engineering team uses that, then when your engineering team makes a critical change to one of the components in that product, and you don't have proper processes, then the manual either doesn't have the information it needs about that new change or is incorrect. So having all of that, and that's just one example. There's millions of different use cases just like that would allude to why you would want to be able to see a comprehensive view of all the documentation and materials related to a given product, and be able to use that intelligently through a process lifecycle to understand the impacts of changes that you're making, and also to understand the relationships between different pieces of data that you have stored in a PLM system. That's an important factor.
I mean, in the end, it's all about providing the correct information in the correct, on the best quality at the correct time. So which type of information is actually completely independent. It doesn't matter. It depends on the use case, and it depends on the lifecycle phase or whatever you want to do or what you want to achieve. I think that's the main pain point that most of the people will experience, which then, of course, because if they're in the maintenance phase and they need documentation of, for example, a part or like an engine, they will blame the PLM solution, because in reality, then they don't have access to the PLM data. So I think data provision, getting access to the correct information across the entire lifecycle, is, I think, the most critical thing, and that requires an organizational change as well, because that requires everyone to store the correct information in the correct type or with the correct metadata in the correct system. And I think, especially talking about PLM, I think one of the most critical things from a tool perspective you want to provide is integration capability. You must be able to integrate multiple tools to your data source or to your environment. If you're not open enough, if you're blocking every connection, for example, you're screwed, you're done. You won't be able to achieve a PLM system because you cannot connect to different tools. You cannot work on multiple processes that maybe are connected to multiple departments. You cannot work on like good methods or methodologies because they usually have an impact on multiple tools. So I think that's one of the killer pain points that we need to be taken care of. And especially the biggest requirement that everyone has to do is like make some thoughts or like think about what are your precise use cases? What do you really need? Do you need a PLM, or is it just that you need a PLM for positioning purposes? Because it sounds way more fancy than a PDM solution. But in my experience, like 80 or 90% of the cases, a PDM solution is totally fine for everyone.
Yep, and a good PDM solution that can expand into a PLM solution is a really great foundation to start with, to get value out of a system that gives you the functionality that you need at the time, and let you grow into the additional functionalities that you will eventually need as you grow in that PDM solution. Going back real quick to our conversation about some of the differences and things. One other example that I'll bring up that I have customers that benefit from all over North America is warranty service and documentation around parts after they've been produced. Right? In PLM and PDM, you're generally designing something that will be manufactured, and then when that product gets manufactured and is out in the field, there's a service element that typically happens if you're a company, and when your product is out in the field and people who are using it have issues, having a PDM is great. It helps you get access to the original drawings so that you can go and maybe try to research and figure out why that problem is happening or how to fix it. But if you have a PLM and you can have multiple different departments in that, maybe your service department actually uses your PLM, then you can store that information in PLM so that everything's in a centralized location, all tied together. And that's just one example. Extrapolate that example into the hundreds of potential other examples of how you can bring all of your data into one centralized source. And I'm sure you'll Steffen, know exactly where I'm heading here. Is once you have all of your data in a single centralized source in a meaningful way that you can understand and algorithmically say, okay, this is what happened. Here's the procedure. Here's all the things that are the documents and the information that's related to this given part, for example. Then incorporating things like business intelligence and reporting, metrics, AI. That's all downstream functionality that happens almost naturally at that point. The key is getting all of your stuff into one spot.
Yeah, and it
in
all
a way that's
depends on the
usable.
data quality. If you're not able to provide the correct information in the best quality or best possible quality, all these scenarios won't work.
Mm-hmm.
You need good data, and I think the PLM versus PDM discussion is actually leading to this statement. In the end, it's all about providing the correct information at the correct time and the correct quality.
I 100%
That's what you need.
agree.
And of course, you need to store the information somewhere. You must have integration to your CAD systems, to ERP, to other tools that you need, requirements management tools, project management tools, and so on. But in the end, everything that matters is that you have access to the correct information and are able to store them in a correct way.
Yep, and to kind of wrap this up and bring up the one other topic that every single person in the world is talking about right now, which is AI. I just got back from a conference in Washington D.C. Very recently, where there was lots of major companies that if I said the names of them, I guarantee that anybody listening to this would understand and know those names. They were all there talking about how AI is changing the game in our industry, in PLM and PDM, but also all over the world. So, one of the common themes, and we heard from different PLM vendors, we heard from ERP vendors. There was, all over the place. The Secretary of War Department for the United States, the NASA policy directors. There there was one common theme amongst all of them. And really, if you ask anybody who's doing anything in AI right now, this rings 100% true probably with any of them. And that is that if you put garbage in, garbage comes out.
Yeah.
You have to have a solid data foundation. And this type of solution, whether it be PDM in just a general focused around engineering and some other more, I won't call them simplistic because they're not really that simple, but standardized use cases maybe is a better word. Or if you're going to do something more complex where you're managing the life cycle around things like with a full PLM, either one of those things, it's important to have the data structure in order to be able to get to any of those AI functionalities or, augmented intelligence functionalities. You have to have a baseline first. And, a solution like this is how you're going to be able to get that baseline.
Yeah, 100%. Jacob, thank you very much for your discussion. I'm looking forward to the upcoming sessions.
You as well, Steffen. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And we will meet again and talk again for our next episode.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching episode 1 of the PLM versus PDM discussion. Stay tuned for episode 2, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new episode.